This is Better Together. Sweet Haven Farm, Sweet Small Town Romance, Book 2. Written by Jessie Gussman. Performed by J. Dice. Episode 9. Chapter 16. Wyatt stepped into the kitchen, holding Harper's hand. A visit here was certainly easier with Harper beside him. His dad looked exactly the same as he always remembered him. Tall, with broad shoulders. He'd never had any hair. Dark eyes, clean shave. Dark skin that showed his half-Latino heritage. He'd been born in America. His dad's side of the family had owned the resort, and he'd spent much of his childhood and all of his adulthood here. He owned it outright now, and had added to the original holdings. His dad was certainly a born businessman. His dad finished washing his hands at the sink and turned to dry them. "Hey, Dad. Wyatt, you never did introduce me to that little girl of yours." His dark eyes traveled to Harper. Wyatt put his arm around her shoulders. "This is Harper." "Your fiancée." "Yeah?" Man, he hated that lie. "Welcome to Chile, Harper." His dad held his hand out. Harper grasped it. "Thanks, Mr. Fernandez." "Call me David." Harper nodded. "Come on and sit down. I heard the kids want to head out snowmobiling this evening." Sophia placed the salad on the table. "Kayla, Steve, come on," she called. She pointed to the 2 chairs on the side of the table. "You 2 can sit here. Kayla and Steve will sit across from you, and David and I will take the ends." Wyatt held the chair for Harper as Kayla and Steve came in from the hall. Because of his discussion with Steve earlier in the day, Wyatt looked a little longer at Kayla. Her black eyes went immediately to him when she walked in. With her shiny dark hair and skin, she was almost the exact opposite of Harper. In personality, too, when he thought about it, since she was vivacious and almost crazy. Certainly not someone who enjoyed a quiet evening reading a book by the fire, which he would say was Harper's favorite pastime. As the family settled into their chairs and started passing their food, David looked at Harper. "So, considering that Wyatt was practically born with skis on his feet, I find it odd that you were in the beginner class today. How did you 2 meet?" Harper put the forkful of salad she was holding in her mouth. Great stalling technique. She looked at him with raised brows. He was the one who'd started this lie. He took a sip of water. "I met her when I moved to the States. We've been best friends since then, and—" "Isn't she related to your Uncle Fink somehow?" Kayla asked. "I think I remember hearing about a Harper, maybe in a Christmas letter or something." His dad's jaw tightened, and those dark eyes narrowed. There must have been some kind of competition between his dad and Uncle Fink he'd never noticed. No relation. Uncle Fink married her mom." "I see. So you're related to her the same way you're related to me." He had never thought of that. "It's not a relation." "Right. Connected to her the same as me." "Yeah." "Wyatt spent the winter in Colorado, and he was saying that the resort he worked at had a masseuse on staff." Harper changed the subject. Wyatt's dad's eyes brightened and settled on Harper. Wyatt brushed her leg with his fingers to thank her for changing the subject. He shouldn't have. His fingers tingled and he had trouble concentrating on the conversation. "Was that a popular idea?" "Not so much in the morning, but as you can imagine, as people came off the slopes, she was busy until late at night. They actually ended up hiring 4 more. Wyatt grinned. The wheels in his dad's head were turning. He made a note to himself to thank Harper later. His dad rubbed his chin. "That's interesting." "Yeah, I think it's a hard, tiring job, but it's not hard to get training." Wyatt had been glad that his job enabled him to be outside on the slopes, and pitied the poor people stuck inside working. "Were the services included or extra?" "They were included for premium guests, but with a limit. Day passes had to pay extra. A lot of people did." "I see." His dad propped an elbow on the table. "That sounds like an improvement you can spearhead when you move here." He looked back at Harper. "Is that what you do?"
"No, I'm a nutritionist."
Wyatt's chest puffed out just a little. Harper had a goofy side that normally only he got to see. Usually, like now, people saw her as an intellectual, serious. She was one of those people that others were naturally drawn to for help and advice. It seemed his dad was no different. Wyatt contained his smile, but he loved looking at her the way she was now, and imagining her the way she could be, like when they walked through the tunnel together, or had their Christmas tree trimming race.
"She helped me some this afternoon with the new menu I've been planning,"
Sophia said. His dad said. "A degree in sports medicine would be more helpful around here." He turned his attention to his plate. That's what his dad had wanted him to study in college. Unfortunately, even with Harper's help, he'd not been able to still his wanderlust long enough to get a degree. He couldn't bring himself to regret it, but he did hate the nasty, lingering feeling that he had disappointed his dad. Again. He didn't rise to the bait. Everyone at the table, even Steve, knew about his failure to stay in college. Somehow that made him think of his mother. Even though she'd been gone for 10 years, it still didn't seem right to sit at the big solid wood family table in the kitchen without her, to see his dad with another woman. Not that his parents were married, or were even a couple while he was growing up. Just every time they visited the resort, she was here. Wyatt glanced beside him. Harper was another unusual addition to the table. Welcome. She gave him peace. He couldn't help but compare the welcome he received at her home to what she had put up with here. Thankfully, Sophia turned the conversation to the great snowmobiling weather, and it wasn't long until dinner was over.
"I'll get you that suit. Follow me,"
Kayla said to Harper after they'd carried their plates to the sink. "Steve and I'll grab towels," Wyatt said. "We'll let the other guys know we're ready and we'll swing back around to pick you up after we top them off. Say 20 minutes? Steve asked. "That's plenty of time for me. You good with that?" Wyatt asked Harper. She nodded and gave him a "what am I getting into" look before trailing out of the kitchen behind Kayla.
"Here, this one should work for you."
Kayla held up a purple and green one-piece suit.
"I bought it a few years ago, but never wore it. I like bikinis."
"Thanks." Harper wasn't exactly in a position to be choosy about what type of suit she wore.
"No problem."
Harper started for the door. Kayla's voice made her pause.
"Come on outside when you're changed. I'm not waiting on you. I'm driving my own machine. I'll have to go get it."
"Okay." Harper walked out and down the hall to the room Wyatt and she shared. It was easy to see why everyone thought Wyatt didn't fit with her. She'd never snowmobiled, never skied, never snowboarded. The only winter sport she'd ever done, sledding, hadn't been mentioned here at all. And she hadn't seen a single sled. But Kayla, she was perfect for Wyatt, and she seemed to know it and want him. which should make Harper want to try to matchmake. But some nasty, belligerent side she hadn't even known she possessed had been churning deep within her. The one thing that kept popping to the top? She wanted Wyatt. Which was dumb. He saw her as a friend, and she didn't fit into his life at all. In a few weeks, he'd be moving here permanently. She'd only been here a few hours, but it was enough to know that even if she lived here for decades, she would never feel at home in Chile. She would never be a natural on skis, although if she were here for any length of time, she would learn to ski or wear her legs off trying. She had zero desire to drive her own snowmobile. Wyatt had to have known that she wouldn't want to. Or maybe he was afraid she couldn't. That was possible too. She finished dressing and closed the door behind her. She could admit to herself that she wanted Wyatt. Her feelings had gone way beyond the friend stage. But not only did she not want to ruin their friendship, if she could manage to get him to notice her as more than a friend, she would never fit into this world, and Wyatt belonged here like roots belonged in the ground. Kayla would be the perfect girl for him. He should have snapped her up. To Harper, Kayla looked at Wyatt like she'd be more than willing to be with him. She couldn't imagine what held him back. Unfortunately, because Harper was pretending to be his fiancé, she could hardly play matchmaker. But tonight, she could try to talk to Wyatt about Kayla. Maybe she could help her best friend settle down here, which would make his dad happy, and marry the girl who was perfectly suited for him. Only the light over the sink lit the kitchen as she walked through it and out the back door. From there, she could see the ski slopes, well lit and busy. Lift chairs full of bundled-up skiers crawled up the mountain, while colorful dots zoomed down. Laughter and occasional shouts echoed through the cold air. Now that the sun had gone down, she could see her breath coming out in puffs, and the air had a definite bite to it. She looked in both directions, but nothing moved close to the house. The full moon, close enough to tempt her to reach out and touch it, glistened on the snow with a sweet blue light. The silence and isolation of where she stood, close enough to see the crowd, but not a part of it, settled into her soul. And for the first time, a nugget of feeling, admiration, not quite love, stirred in her heart for this country in which she stood. Even at night, it was beautiful. The sharp sound of a motor split the bubble that had wrapped itself around Harper. A light cut through the darkness. A snowmobile came into view, skimming across the snow and stopping in front of her. Wyatt lifted up the visor on his helmet, then reached around and grabbed another helmet, holding it out to her. "Thanks!" she called loudly, to be heard over the rumble of the motor. "You sure you're good for this?" he said with the same volume. She pulled the helmet on. "I'm sure," unless he'd changed his mind, but he hadn't seemed to have. He was grinning. If she was going to get the helmet buckled, the gloves needed to go. She started to take them off. "I'll get it." Within seconds, he had it done. He thumped behind his shoulder. "Hop on, unless you're driving." "Not tonight." Or ever. Snowmobiles were as unfamiliar as skis, but much bigger. Instead, she put a hand on Wyatt's shoulder and climbed on behind him. "Hold on!" She put her arms around Wyatt's waist. His body seemed to pulse with energy and excitement. It tingled up her arm and stirred her own minuscule sense of adventure. He pressed the throttle, and the machine leapt under them. The full moon, the mountain covered in snow, and the droning of the motor contributed to the feeling that the world had narrowed to just the two of them as they flew over the snow, leaving the lights of the slopes far behind. Wyatt turned his head and called over the sound of the wind and racing motor. "They're coming behind us! They were standing around yakking, and I wanted to have you here by myself first." Had she heard him right? He wanted her alone. Electric pulses raced up her legs, but she fought the prickles of excitement. He must have something he needed to talk to her about. Maybe he wanted her help in attracting Kayla. Talk about hard. Could she help him woo another woman? Of course she could. She might have more than friendly feelings for him, but she could push that aside. The happiness of her best friend was more important than what she wanted. She squeezed him to let him know she heard. Maybe on the way home she wouldn't be able to enjoy holding his solid torso. So she leaned against his back and inched closer, enjoying the hardness of his muscles and the way she totally trusted his skill on the machine. "Am I going too fast?" he shouted over his shoulder. "I trust you," she called back. One hand patted her hands where they joined around his stomach. "Right here's the one place you have to watch," he yelled as he slowed down and pointed his gloved hand at a reflector on their right. Craning her neck, she peered at the side of the trail. The gray-blue snow ended abruptly beside the trail into pitch-black darkness. "A crevice," he said. "How deep?" she asked. His shoulders shrugged. "I don't know. Don't want to find out." She shivered. "Me either." "Not tonight, anyway." She felt, more than heard, him laugh. She tightened her arms just as he gasped the engine and they lurched away. In a few minutes, he pointed at what looked like a low-hanging cloud hugging the mountainous terrain. It wasn't long after that he circled and slowed to a stop, shutting the motor off. The silence of the mountains surrounded them like a shield. "A hot spring?" Harper asked after contemplating their surroundings. "Yeah, this is an active volcano." "Wow, when's the last time it erupted?" "Not sure, but the water's always warm." "That's great. We'll be nice and warm when we die." "And we'll be together." He stood, pulling his leg over and hopping off. "That's what the swimsuit is for." "Okay." She still wasn't sure how comfortable she was about the whole active volcano thing, but she supposed they weren't in any more danger here than they were at the resort. Danger or no, if she had to run from an erupting volcano, she'd rather not do it in her swimsuit. Wyatt opened a small compartment at the back of the snowmobile that she hadn't realized was there, and took out 2 rolled towels. He laid them over the handlebars. "Are you going to get in?" She didn't want to. "Yeah, but this is your gig. I'll follow you." "Set your clothes here. Anywhere else and they'll get snow on them." He patted the seat. "You'll have to take a couple of steps in the snow. I'll help you. There's some natural places to sit." Wyatt laid his coat down and peeled off his shirt. Harper stood and unzipped her coat. "Is this private ground?" "We own it, but there's a couple of other hot springs that are easier to get to. That fissure I showed you makes this one off-limits for guests, which is why we chose it. We won't have to share." "I see." She laid her coat down and started on her shirts, suddenly self-conscious. Wyatt and she had swum plenty in the pond over the years, but she'd never bothered with a swimming suit. She'd just worn shorts and a t-shirt. Plus, it had been a few years. She glanced over as he turned to lay his shirt down. She didn't remember those broad shoulders and the muscles that rippled under the moonlight. Her stomach wobbled and delicious, warm sparks of heat poured out of it. Not sure what to make of those feelings, she covered them with conversation.
It's beautiful here.
Wyatt unbuckled his pants. Harper skidded her eyes away, focusing on her own clothing. The full moon is beautiful in any country, but here on the mountain, it's especially gorgeous. Wait until you're in the water with the snow and the heat. There's nothing quite like it. Pride and love laced his voice. He took a boot off, balancing on one foot as he removed his snow pants. He set his bare foot down on the snow. This is the hard part. If you hurry, I'll carry you in so you don't have to walk on the white stuff. She sat on the snowmobile and pulled her boots off, hurrying more because she was suddenly very aware that Wyatt was a man, a handsome, virile man, and she was a woman who found him attractive. Very attractive. Kicking her last boot off, she slipped her snow pants off and set them on the seat. Before she could say anything, Wyatt scooped her up. His warm skin contrasted with the cold air as he held her tight. She breathed in his familiar, comforting scent, mixed with the crisp mountain air. She wanted to make a joke about not falling, or about her being afraid, but she couldn't, and Wyatt was uncharacteristically silent as well. She did manage to resist the temptation to press her lips against his shoulder, to rub her cheek against his warm skin, to snuggle closer. It's going to feel pretty warm at first, until you get used to it. He stepped in, seeming to know where the best places to put his feet were, and he set her down. She barely had time to miss the contact of his body before the warm water lapped at her knees.
It's hot,
she exclaimed in wonder. You'll get used to it and it'll feel good. There's a natural bench over here. Wyatt took her hand and led her around to the far side. He helped her sit and slipped down beside her. The water came up to their shoulders.
Is the whole pool this shallow?
She asked. No, I don't know how deep it is in the middle. That was scary. She squinted. It wasn't very large and lay in the basic shape of a circle. Harper estimated the diameter to be about 20 feet. Wyatt leaned back and rested his head on the ledge behind them. Harper followed suit. Her limbs floated, weightless in the warm water. Peace and calm relaxed her insides.
This place is amazing,
she whispered. I've dreamed about this for years, Wyatt whispered back. His hand grasped hers, intertwining their fingers. Her heart stumbled and her relaxation vanished. Those electric pulses started back up her leg. She drew in a shaky breath. She wanted so much for Wyatt to have deeper feelings for her that she was now imagining things. Deliberately, she laid her head back and closed her eyes. Chapter 17. The hum of snowmobile motors reached Wyatt. Disappointment speared through him. Harper hadn't had a reaction from his declaration. Maybe she was deliberately ignoring him because to acknowledge what he'd said would make their friendship awkward. He slid his thumb over her hand under the water. She didn't pull away.
Haven't you ever been here in a full moon before?
Harper spoke without opening her eyes, her head still laid back on the rim behind them. A few times, he answered. He couldn't tell what she meant, and he didn't have time to find out. Everyone else is going to be here soon.
I hear them.
He squeezed her hand. Her body relaxed into his. The moon and the night, the snow and the heat, all combined to make his insides feel warm and liquid. I know you felt uncomfortable a lot today. It had been odd seeing her today, so far from the farm and everything familiar. He'd never seen her so blatantly out of her element before. But the same good nature and humor she handled everything else with had been present.
Yeah,
I appreciate you doing all this for me.
that's what friends are for.
She pulled away from him.
So, what do you think of Kayla?
Huh? His eyes popped open and he turned his head to study her. She met his gaze.
Kayla, what do you think of her?
He shrugged and leaned his head back. She's nice. She's actually a pretty good downhill skier. Not Olympic quality, but close. He tried to figure out why Harper would be asking about Kayla. The noise of the snowmobiles grew louder.
You two have a lot in common.
He really didn't want to talk about Kayla. It's not that he didn't like her, but they'd never been close. He had no desire to be, and after what Steve had talked about, he just wanted to put her out of his mind. This is the place I spent more time at than any other growing up. I guess the same is true for her.
She loves it here.
He paused before he spoke. You would, too. Harper rolled her head on the ledge, turning to consider Wyatt. Dark shadow obscured her eyes, but she had lifted her head a little and her gaze riveted on his.
I do love it here, mostly because you're here.
She smiled, an easy, friendly smile. It wasn't the kind of smile he wanted, but still his breath whooshed out and he straightened. The water gurgled as his shoulders emerged. Harper didn't move. His hand came out of the water and slid behind her neck. His thumb brushed the skin below her ear. Sparks sizzled up his arm. Do you mean that? He whispered. The low rumble erupted into a loud roar, and headlights cut through the dusky moonlight as the snowmobiles tore around the bend. Wyatt leaned back, choking back his disappointment. Despite the interruption, he kept his hand behind her neck. They adjusted their position naturally, so that his arm ended up behind her. The look, the question, the movement. He wanted to know what Harper was thinking, feeling. Beyond any doubt, he knew she would never mess with him, but he didn't trust himself to read her correctly. Too late to find out now. 3 machines parked in the area around theirs. Kayla, Steve, and another couple.
Where's this amazing woman at that managed to snag Wyatt without even knowing how to ski?
A laughing female voice called out. She's right here, Marie, Wyatt called back. In a low voice, beneath the chatter of the couples removing their outer clothes, Wyatt said, That's Marie. Looks like she's here with Carlos. They're on again, off again in the romance department. Have been for years.
Is she family?
Harper asked, keeping her voice low as well. Not really. She does housekeeping services for us, and Carlos is on the maintenance crew. They've both grown up at the resort, but they never eat at the family table. They'd be welcome to.
Their parents worked there?
Yep.
I see.
Are you still okay with this? His fingers skimmed over her neck. She shivered despite the warmth of the water. He took that as a good sign.
You keep asking me that. Wyatt, you know me well enough. If things get to be too much for me, I'll tell you. I promise.
He leaned into her as though to shield her. They're gonna rib you about the skiing. She laughed softly.
And the snowboarding, and the lack of athletic ability in general.
He looked away. When I first came to Pennsylvania, kids made fun of me constantly, and you stood by me through everything. I ended up being homecoming king. She put a hand on his chest. He wasn't prepared for it and jerked like she scalded him. She snatched her hand back.
I stood by you, true, but it was your affable personality that caused people to see past their differences with you to the great guy you were under it all. Hey, you lovebirds over there, you still have your suits on? Marie called out.
Neither one of them moved. Wyatt couldn't figure out what, exactly, Harper was feeling. Finally, he shook his head. He grinned. "Do we have our suits on, Pickles?"
"Mine's on,"
she called out. He stuffed down his disappointment. His chance to find out what Harper felt was lost with the arrival of his friends. "It's dark. Who cares if we have suits on?" Carlos, built low to the ground but wide as a bull, dropped quickly into the water.
"There's a full moon. I don't want to see your ugly butt, Carlos."
Kayla stepped gracefully in behind him. She moved with the easy power of an athlete. Again, Wyatt wondered about Harper's interest in her. Interesting that Harper and Steve seemed to have both picked up on the same thing. "So, do I leave my trunks on or off?" Steve asked.
"On!"
Everyone chorused. Marie waited around to Harper and Wyatt.
"Hey, Harper, I'm Marie. I do housekeeping and whatever else needs done."
She stuck her hand out. "Except cooking," Carlos said over her shoulder. She smacked him in the chest.
"Don't listen to him. I just don't cook the Chilean dishes he likes. Give me pork and sauerkraut any day."
"You're American?" Harper asked as she shook her hand. Marie was forthright and honest. Wyatt figured she and Harper would be good friends if Harper stayed. He had to quit thinking like that. She'd given no indication whatsoever that she was here for more than a favor to him.
"Yep, my parents moved down here when I was 10. I was joking about the pork and the sauerkraut, though. That's just something you don't get here." "I see," Harper replied. "I've done a little work with Sophia on the menu, and I know that there's a definite cultural difference in cuisine."
Wyatt tucked that info away to ask about later. Harper seemed like she might have liked Sophia, and the menu thing was right up her alley of expertise. "So, Harper, we're all dying to know what you do, since it's obvious you aren't a ski bum," Carlos said as he settled into the warm water against the wall. "I'd say you're not like the usual girls Wyatt brings around, but he's never actually brought a girl here before, so I can't even say we know his type." Steve held a hand out to help Kayla, who swatted it away and settled herself in the water. "She's my type," Wyatt said.
"She's into nutrition,"
Kayla said irritably.
"That's right. And I'm hoping to get tenure at the university where I teach and conduct research."
She was still hoping to get tenure. Wyatt tried not to show his disappointment. "She has a doctorate." Steve sounded impressed.
"Wyatt goes for the smart ones,"
Marie said with a laugh.
"You're hoping to get tenure? You mean you're not moving to Chile with Wyatt?"
Kayla latched on to the gap that Harper had just opened in their cover story. Before he could think of something to say to save the situation, Marie came to their rescue.
"You probably weren't expecting to have to give all that up, so I take it Wyatt proposing was a surprise to you?"
Oh, if they only knew.
"Yeah, definitely unexpected. So, what are you going to do?"
Wyatt broke in. They'd grilled her long enough. "We haven't actually discussed it. We haven't been engaged that long."
"How long?"
Kayla asked. She lifted an arm from the water and pushed her ponytail back over her shoulder. "A little over a month." Wyatt pulled Harper closer to him. She went easily. "Oh, that explains it," Carlos said. "Explains what?" Wyatt asked.
"You two look real comfortable with each other, and you look like you really like each other, but—"
Marie paused, searching for words. Carlos finished for her. But you don't look like lovers. What could they say to that? His stomach twisted uncomfortably. Harper sat, frozen in place beside Wyatt.
We wondered if—
If what? Wyatt asked, a touch of annoyance in his voice.
If you were getting the short end of the stick. If she was going to make you stay in America, quit the sports that you love, and become someone you're not.
Kayla either ignored the fact that Wyatt was getting annoyed or didn't care. Wyatt figured it was the latter. How do you know what I am? Wyatt lifted his arm from behind Harper and leaned forward in the water. He remembered now why Kayla irritated him so much. She constantly made assumptions that were completely wrong. Harper put a hand on his shoulder. It felt warm on his cool skin. She cleared her throat.
Those are legitimate concerns.
No, they're not, Wyatt said immediately.
These people care about you, which is why they're asking.
Her tone was soft, soothing. They're insulting you, and I won't stand for it. She shook her head.
I'm just different. They're not sure they can trust me. And they love you.
He appreciated her defending his friends, especially since they were annoying him. He stretched his fingers out and tried to relax. They'd give any girl he brought here a hard time. I don't know if I'd go that far, Steve said, laughing, easing the tension somewhat. No, she's right. We're just surprised at the kind of girl you picked. We wondered if she— Carlo's voice trailed off. Kayla finished for him.
If she's after your money.
Wyatt straightened. His muscles tensed and his heart raced. He couldn't even look at Harper. He should find this funny. After all, if his friends knew that their engagement was a sham, they wouldn't even be talking like this. But he could hardly contain the urge to defend Harper, physically if necessary. I don't have any money.
You will,
Kayla said, unafraid.
It's no secret that your dad is planning on giving you everything. You'll be a rich man, Wyatt.
Carlos shrugged. Maybe some of the amusement in his face was from seeing his normally unflappable friend annoyed. He certainly didn't try to diffuse the situation with his statement. It sounds to me like she could use a rich backer to fund her research.
I'm not after Wyatt for his money.
As soon as she said it, he knew she couldn't back up her statement with fact without exposing the engagement for the farce it was.
We didn't mean anything by it. We just wanted to protect Wyatt,
Marie said.
So, since we're not mincing words anymore, how about you just tell us, how do we know that you're not using Wyatt for his money?
Kayla asked. You just have to take my word for it, Wyatt said. His voice sounded like tires crunching gravel. Kayla pursed her lips.
I think you're so besotted that you wouldn't know if she were or weren't.
Harper said quickly.
I agree to sign a prenup. If we get divorced, I get nothing.
No prenup. You'll be my wife and I'll provide for you. Wyatt almost snarled. What was wrong with him? This whole conversation was moot. Their engagement was not real. They could say anything. Usually he was the first to goof off, but something about what everyone was saying had hit a nerve.
Okay, you're right. If we get divorced, I get half of your assets, you get half of mine.
He tilted his head. She didn't have any assets. He realized as he looked at her, her eyes twinkling, that she was trying to make him smile, teasing him out of his irritation the way he might do for her. She tossed her head and looked back at his friends.
But seriously, we're not even married yet. Barely engaged. Do we really have to talk like there's going to be a divorce? You have to face reality. 50% of marriages end in divorce,
Kayla said. Not mine. Wyatt's voice held conviction. Harper slipped an arm around his tense back. He tried to relax. She tossed her head in a sassy gesture she only used when they were alone and when she wasn't Professor Bright.
Fine, we won't need a prenup because we aren't getting divorced. Now, you have to agree to cook my dinner every night of our married life, unless you can dunk me in the next 10 seconds.
She splashed him, then dived away. Along the side, probably because she couldn't stand the idea of swimming out over a bottomless hole. She'd adjusted pretty quickly to Chile, but she hadn't changed that much. He slid after her, and by the time he'd caught up to her, a major splashing match was going on. Apparently, he'd kicked water on Kayla as he dove after Harper, and she couldn't let it go. After the splashing wound down, they agreed to a game of chicken. Harper still didn't look too eager to be over the center of the waterhole, even though she'd be sitting on Wyatt's shoulders. As Wyatt crouched down for her to climb on, she whispered,
"If I fall off, I'm going to be grabbing for you."
"That's a good idea. You can drown us both." His easy grin slipped naturally back into place.
The idea of all that water under me with no bottom is petrifying.
This probably wasn't the time to start thanking her again for being such a good sport. Instead, he said, "There has to be a bottom, otherwise the water would drain out."
Stop trying to use logic on my fear.
He snorted. "Fine, drag me down too." Turning, he placed a hand on her shoulder. "I'm sorry about earlier. I was being an idiot about that prenup business. It shouldn't have mattered, but for some reason, I couldn't let it go. Stupid." He leaned closer and lowered his voice. "If you fall off, I will be grabbing for you. There's no way I'm letting anything happen to you." Her hand tightened on his shoulder.
I know. You never have. I guess I was just trying to let you know how nervous I was without actually saying I was nervous.
He ran his hand up her arm, slender and soft. "You haven't been in your comfort zone since we drove away from the farm."
I think I'll let you let me sleep on the bed tonight. Hey, come on! What's taking you two so long?
Marie called out. He chuckled. "That's awfully big of you, Pickles. I'll tell my friends. They'll think you're taking advantage of this big, dumb jock."
Later.
She slipped a leg around his neck and slid into place.
Right now, you need to channel your inner big, dumb jock if you want to win this, since even if every single person here were in a coma, they'd still be more athletic than me.
Possibly, but they don't have your heart.
Right now, it's the muscles that matter, mister.
He grabbed a hold of her feet and helped her place them around his waist. Brain beats brawn every time.
I think this is the exception to the rule.
Lock your legs, Pickles. We got this. Harper did what he told her to, gripping the sides of his hard chest with her knees, latching her feet around his waist. His hands held her legs firmly.
Are you two finally ready?
Marie asked. Wyatt, who had been sitting on the natural bench that lined the pool, slipped into the water with her on his shoulders. "We're ready. Come get us," Wyatt called. He started moving slowly forward. Marie rode on Carlos's shoulders. They edged in from their right, while Steve, with Kayla, came from the left. Wyatt squeezed her right leg and inched in that direction, but it didn't matter which way he moved. Both of the other couples were aiming for Harper and him, which made sense. Gang up and get one down, then there were only two left. Wyatt squeezed both of Harper's legs as a warning, then lunged forward, splashing water into Carlos's eyes at the same time. Carlos flinched back, causing Marie to tilt forward. Harper reached down to try to twist her around and take advantage of her loss of balance, but Carlos recovered and Harper's hand slid off Marie's shoulder. Marie grabbed her forearm and yanked. Wyatt twisted and lunged, trying to leverage Harper's weight and help keep her balanced at the same time. His hands left her legs, splashing and straight-arming the other men, while his legs churned the water, keeping them up. Steve and Kayla came within arm's distance. Harper grappled with both Marie and Kayla, while Wyatt tried to think of a strategy. He managed a forceful splash of water, which must have disoriented Carlos because he backed off, giving Harper her right arm free to try to twist Kayla off balance. As tiny as Kayla was, her arm strength was phenomenal, and the smaller body gave a lower center of gravity. Steve and she were hardly ever off balance. Harper managed to get both hands on Kayla's right arm. She yanked with all her strength, gripping Wyatt's body tight with her legs. Wyatt maneuvered to try to give her more leverage. Kayla jerked forward, flailing, but Steve twisted under her and enabled her to catch her balance. Carlos entered the fray again on their right, and Wyatt twisted to meet their attack. Harper fought off Marie's hands, which sought purchase on her forearms. Suddenly, Harper yanked back. She cried out, falling backward. Hi, this is Jay, and thanks for listening. If you're ready for another great audiobook, here's one we think you might like. Or check out the playlist with all our latest releases. Don't forget to subscribe to Say with Jay, give this video a thumbs up, and tell us what you liked in the comments.